Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege and the honor to present to you Special Envoy Amos Hochstein. Special Envoy currently serves as the Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, leading the Bureau of Energy Resources, ENR, at the U.S. Department of State. He oversees foreign policy engagement in the critical intersection of energy and national security. In this role, he advises the Secretary on Global Energy Security and Diplomacy, as well as promotes U.S. interests to ensure energy resources are used to increase economic opportunity, stability, and prosperity around the world. The Special Envoy Hochstein also advises the Secretary on U.S. strategy to advance global integration of renewable and clean energy sources. Prior to this role, Mr. Hochstein served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Diplomacy, and in that capacity oversaw the Office of Middle East and Asia and the Office of Europe, the Western Hemisphere, and Africa, where he led the Bureau's energy diplomacy efforts. Prior to joining the State Department, Mr. Hochstein spent more than 15 years advising U.S. elected officials, candidates for public office, and thought leaders on domestic and global energy policy initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Hochstein. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I want to also thank Mr. Atali, my friend Mr. Makhzoumi, and of course my old friend Minister Nazarian, who I've worked with before and look forward to continuing to work with. It's really a pleasure to be here at the Oil and Gas Forum. But most importantly, it's a real pleasure to be in Lebanon. And I also want to recognize my good friend, Ambassador Jones, who's with us here today. I've been coming to Lebanon since 1994 was my first visit, and I've been here every year but one on many occasions. And I have to say, once you come to Lebanon, you get addicted, and I keep wanting to come back. And it's my favorite place to come is Beirut, and I just hope that I can come to start cutting some of the ribbons on some of the platforms out in the offshore someday. But what I'm here to really tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're in the middle of a revolution. Now, in the Middle East, you got to be careful with those kinds of words. This is not a revolution that carries weapons or any weapons are involved. This is a revolution that is happening worldwide that we are living in the middle of. We are all in the middle of this energy revolution. And I want to explain exactly what I mean by living through an energy revolution, because I firmly believe that in the years to come, we're going to be studying this period of time over the last few years, the last 4 or 5 years, as the moment of transformation in energy. In order to do that, let me do an exercise. Let me look at what would have happened if I was standing here in 2012, just 4 years ago. It's not a long time. And if you think about it in energy terms, it's a very short period of time, since very little happened in the oil industry from its infancy until very recently. And very minor changes took very long time to occur. But let's remember 2012. The price of oil was averaging above $100 a barrel. Our production in the United States of oil, we were considered the declining oil producer of the world. The once great producer was below 6 million barrels a day. We had energy sanctions for the first time on Iran, limiting their ability to export oil. Libya was producing, at that point, 1.3 million barrels a day. Saudi Arabia's international reserves were growing at a remarkable rate of 20% year on year. The United States was the largest importer of LNG, of natural gas, in the world, with expectations that we would continue to grow in our imports. Solar and wind technologies were entirely uncompetitive. In fact, that was the time that the New York Times ran an editorial that so wanted to see a world of renewable energy that it hoped for and called for in its headline, "Bring on $200 oil." The hope was we would get $200 oil because it was seen that that was the only way that we would get investment in renewable energy. Qatar was the dominant and only LNG exporter around the world of real magnitude. Now think about that world that I just described, and think about if I came to you to this oil and gas forum in 2012, and I made a number of bold predictions of what the world in 2016 would look like. If I told you that we were at $49 a barrel, and that would be considered a high, since we had just come from below $30. The United States was no longer producing below 6 million barrels a day, but we were over 9 million barrels a day. Just for context, we added more than what Kuwait produces, or UAE. That's just the delta. There were no longer any oil sanctions on Iran, but there were sanctions on Russia. The United States would no longer be the largest importer of LNG, and in fact, we had just exported our first LNG cargoes to South America and Europe, en route to becoming one of the largest LNG exporters. A transformation in 4 years from being the biggest importer to en route to becoming one of the biggest exporters. But we were not alone. Qatar, the dominant LNG exporter, will maintain its position as an exporter. But by 2020, the United States will be an almost equal exporter, and Australia, a non-player in 2012 in LNG exports, will be the largest exporter of LNG. Libya would no longer be producing 1.3 million barrels a day, and we today see 250,000 to 300,000 as a major success. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund is no longer growing at 20% year on year. In fact, we'd be reporting public reports of a decline of 16% in 2015. And within the past decade, the global renewable energy market would expand more than sixfold. Solar and wind can now compete with traditional hydrocarbon projects without any subsidies. And what that really means is you don't need $200 oil in order to bring on renewable energy. In fact, last year's investment in renewable energy was at an all-time high. Nearly $330 billion were invested in renewable energy last year around the world. $330 billion. And that was done in the year of the lowest oil prices in over a decade. And for the first time in history, more of the world's money was spent fostering renewable energy technology than new fossil fuel plants. I don't know what else to say except for calling this a revolution. But within that context, what's remarkable is what's happened in my home in the United States, where we went from importing over 65% of our oil, all of our gas. We were dependent on coal for our electricity. And today, from that position of dependency, We have revolutionized ourselves into an energy superpower. And what does it mean to be a superpower? It doesn't mean because we produce more than 9 million barrels a day, because we have over 100 years of natural gas. That's not the reason we are a superpower in energy. It's because in any way and form that you want to think about the word energy, we have a lead. And what does that mean? Oil, gas, wind, solar, but also what Minister Nazarian talked about, efficiency rates. And the R&D and the investment in people that has produced the best technologies, innovation in the energy sector. But there's no magic here. There's nothing about the United States that can't be replicated everywhere around the world. And that's what I want to come and talk about today here. We're living in a revolutionary time not only in the United States. Look around the world. We went from a world in oil that was dominated by OPEC. We went from a world that had few producers of gas. It was a club. It was an exclusive club. But there's no more clubs. Anybody can do it. One of the largest discoveries the year that it happened was the Jubilee field in Ghana. The largest gas discoveries in the world are no longer in the United States. They're not in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or Kuwait, or even Russia that has enormous reserves. The new discoveries that are happening closer to home here in Lebanon, in Mozambique, in Tanzania. The largest discovery in the history of the Mediterranean happened in Egypt. Your neighbor to the south, Israel, Cyprus. Soon in Morocco, we're talking about potential discoveries in Mauritania and Senegal. This is a worldwide phenomenon. But it doesn't come on its own. It doesn't come by itself. And the fact that natural gas reserves have been there for 1 billion years doesn't mean that they come out of the ground on their own. The people and the government in the countries have to do the work to make it happen. Now, I first started coming here almost 4 years ago, over 3 years ago. And at that time, the interest in anywhere to have natural gas discoveries was huge. Price of oil was at $100, as I said, and therefore price of gas was traded in Asia at between $18 and $20. Today it's at $7, $6.50. Prices in Europe were between $12 and $14. Today they're $4.50. So that means that the moment of opportunity really was during that period of time of 2012, 2013, when discoveries were being made all around. But I'm not here to harp on the past on what could have been, on a missed opportunity. I'm here to talk about what's the opportunity today and tomorrow. Because at some point, we are going to have a conversation about missed opportunities. We're not there yet. So the question becomes, what do you do? Because in an environment of $45 to $50 oil, you got to work a lot harder to convince a company to come and drill. Because the potential is not oil, which is easy to transport. The potential is gas, for which you need infrastructure, dedicated infrastructure, and you need markets nearby. Now, the markets are no longer paying those $12 in Europe for the gas from Lebanon. As I said, they're only paying $4.50. So you got to figure out a way that attracts those companies to come here. So what becomes a qualitative difference is the kind of investment environment, and we refer to it as two risks, or rather many risks that are divided into two categories. One is below ground risk, and one is above ground risk. The below ground risk, that's up to God. Whatever's there is there. Whatever's not there, yes. And if it's not there, it's going to take 1 billion years. But above ground, that's the government. That's the people. Because that goes to taxes, and that goes to royalties, and that goes to structure, and it goes to confidence in the legal system. and it goes to overall stability and a decision to move together in a united fashion. It's a buyer's market. The companies are going to go where they think they have the best potential. And at a time when we have seen over $300 billion of capex reduction, what does that mean? That means that oil and gas companies over the last year and a half, since the decline of prices, June 2014 it was $115 a barrel. In 2015 we reached $26, $27 a barrel. During that period of time, in the last year and a half, the major oil and gas companies around the world took off the table over $300 billion of already announced investment. That's an enormous amount. They have laid off thousands of people. And therefore you have a Darwinian competition for where they're going to invest those dollars. Where there's a resource and where there's confidence in the market. There is no reason why we all can't go outside, look out into the ocean and see rigs there. Because the potential is here. I will tell you, every company that looks at this region knows that the likelihood for discovery is pretty high. Oil and gas is a simple business at the end of the day. It's a lot of complicated stories, a lot of complicated numbers. But I'll give you an example of what I mean that it's simple. Nobody takes risks until somebody does. In Ghana, nobody believed anything was there. Cosmos Energy came, they discovered something, and all of a sudden, within 2 years, you had a dozen companies signing leases to drill there. Because when you make a discovery, everybody around you assumes the geology is there. Lebanon's not the case where there's one discovery. There are several, and they're not small. And almost everyone agrees the area in the Eastern Mediterranean is underexplored. So the potential is without a doubt there. The interest is there. But we just have to work a lot harder to attract the same investment that we would have had to work for in 2012. So what does that mean for the government? Yes, everybody in this room, everybody in the government, everybody in the press, everybody knows there's a disputed area of water between Lebanon and Israel. That's a relatively small, tiny part of the ocean in the south of the country. But we have allowed it to hold hostage the rest of the territory and hold hostage the opportunity. And that's where we have to come together. It's one thing to figure out the disputed area. It's another to figure out a way to move forward on the opportunity, on the potential. Now, what it does, if you can realize that potential, it's not only about what kind of revenues and money it would bring into the coffers of Lebanon. It's about what kind of ancillary industries can it bring. How does it bring down costs? There are power outages that all of you know in Lebanon. How do you fix the power sector? There's one thing about the energy sector that makes it so different from any other commodity or sector in the world. And that is that you cannot have a growing economy, whether you're a developed or developing country. You cannot grow a business, whether you're small, medium, or large, without access to affordable and reliable sources of energy, of power. It's difficult to attract investment when the investor needs to put together the kind of generators to ensure stability of supply. So it's not only about what kind of exports and what kind of revenues for taxes that you're going to create. It's about what does it do for the economy in Lebanon? How do you create a better power system? How do you bring down the cost? We're sitting in a lull because the fuel oil cost, the dirtier version and more expensive version that you're burning here for electricity instead of gas, has been cheap for the last year and a half because oil prices are down. But the cost of the economy has doubled in the last 6 months. I'm not a Lebanese economist, but I know that you're buying fuel oil, and I know that fuel oil was indexed to a Brent cost of $26 6 months ago, and today it's at $49. And what if some of the prognosticators are correct, and prices will go to $70 or $65? That's another 50% increase from where you are today. That costs the economy. The flip side is not only can you reverse the cost by bringing on gas, but you can create opportunity and create jobs that Mr. Makhzoumi talked about, and bring about a new industry that can have ancillary parts to that industry that will create jobs and investment. And not only that, once you bring in those companies to make investments in this, it sends the signal to the rest of the investor world. It's a good place to do business. I'm okay. If I've never done business in Lebanon before, look, Total did it, Engie did it, Exxon did it. Safe, the water's warm. I can come to Lebanon to make the investment. So there's all of these issues that are so critical in order to be able to move forward. Now, with all of this, I come here again and again, not because I'm trying to solve something, but because I'm so optimistic. I am eternally optimistic. I believe that, without a doubt, the potential is so great. There is no other country in this region that has the kind of ingenuity and entrepreneurship that Lebanon has. The potential of its youth, of its education, of its history, of good business people. There is no reason why that will not harness new technologies, whether it's natural gas, investments in renewables, and putting that all together. I believe that could be a great chance for progress, prosperity, stability, security in this region, and will tie Lebanon, once they do produce the gas, to the markets of Europe, the nearby markets of Europe. Because Europe today, the parts of Europe that are closest to you, are dependent on one supplier, and if you open up the newspapers in Europe, all they talk about is trying to get new sources of energy into Europe. The Eastern Mediterranean is going to be that source. It's going to be the Caspian, and it's going to be the Eastern Mediterranean. So it will tie in physical ties the Lebanese economy, Lebanese business, to that of new markets to the West in Europe. So that's why I'm optimistic. That's why I was so glad that, Mr. Makhzoumi, that you invited me to come here. I would have come anyway. But that's why I keep coming back. I really believe in the opportunity of Lebanon. And while people outside talk about the neighborhood and all the things that are happening in Syria and the devastation that we see every day, the best way to fight that is to focus on what we can do, what we can create, what we can innovate, and come up with that opportunity for a catalyst for a new economy in Lebanon and a new future for Lebanon. Thank you very much.